Okay, I hope I notice when somebody else comes in. Okay, so it's a tree in the forest, a statue in the square, what we know, what we think we know, and what we want to know. So, in these, oh yes, before I start, I just want to say again something I say every time. This is very relaxed. The subject might not be relaxed, but we are, at least some of us are. So this is not a lecture and then questions. I shall be talking for a while, and if you feel you want to come in and interrupt you, I will either tell you don't, or I will answer your question, or I will say, can we leave that for a bit and we'll go on to it later. So basically we're having the old-fashioned discussion, philosophical discussion, where I say things and you might agree, you might not agree, and usually people don't agree, which is okay. So I just wanted to mention something that happened at the end of our last meeting. Those who were there will remember, and I've been thinking about it ever since. It was Morris who said that my book about nothing matters, gave him the tools and understanding to talk to people who were dying, and this left a huge impression on me. And I've been thinking about it because my books are not. I mean, I don't write my books in order to be self-help books or to help you to get through problems or whatever. Self-books is not my style. What Morris said made me wonder, and I thought I succeeded beyond what I set out to do. And if people get something from the book that make them do things, that's fantastic. But that's not the idea. Okay. Basically, I want to I want you to what I say reflects back upon all of us, and then we can decide to do things. I basically like to shake things. Ron,
can I just say to you
that
after all philosophy is self-help. It is only our attempt to understand, make sense of our lives, our consciousness, and our universe.
Okay.
Yes, I agree with that.
I'd like to add to that.
Yes, Frank.
In the 7th century, Boethius wrote his famous Consolations of Philosophy as he awaited execution, in order to console himself before the execution.
Well, I'm going to come out against the general opinion. I don't think that philosophy might be what we want to hear. It might be something that we don't actually like when we find it out.
Okay. Fair enough. I can just tell you what I intend to do, what I intended to do, and if it has another effect, that's fantastic. I mean, that is absolutely great. But it's not what I set out to do. My editor of both books said to me, you know, what is your aim? What's the bottom line? I said I don't know. All I'm doing is to look at things and shake them, and dislodge people from complacency, perhaps, to question assumptions that are so basic that they often go that we don't even notice them. So what I want to point out basically is what is too close to be seen. I want to look behind the mirror, but we can't. We can never look behind the mirror, and we all want to look behind it. We just can't. We're always faced with ourselves. Okay, so the big question of philosophy after all this time, I realize, is what's going on. I mean, that's all it is as far as I'm concerned. What's going on? So at this time, I'm taking philosophy to the streets, literally. And because philosophy is about what's going on. And this time, for my pains, I'm going to talk about something that could be problematic, and I'm a bit worried about it. So what I want to do here, when we get into it, when we at last get to statues, and it'll take a while because I can't get into statues now, we'll all be killing each other. I hope that when I get to statues, we'll basically understand about knowledge, etc. But we're going to try and keep this non-political, if it's at all possible, and we're going to keep to some sort of philosophical bent. So how do we know what's going on? It's strange, actually. It's largely unknown how we know, which is definitely problematic. What is knowledge, and how we know we know? That is the most scary of topics. The most brilliant part that I know, the beginning of the Bible, whoever wrote it, it was brilliant, because it was Adam and Eve. They did the ultimate sin. They wanted to find out knowledge. They wanted to know, and that was the worst thing they could have done, because the boss didn't want them to know. Knowing is dangerous. Knowing is not good. But since from that, and then he let them out. He said, if you want to know, you can't enjoy yourselves anymore. You've got to have a hard life, which I suppose most of us do have. So I just want to quote you Donald Rumsfeld of 2002, who said the following: there are no knowns, which is fair, known knowns. There are things we know that we know, that's also fair. There are known unknowns, which is also okay. That is to say, there are things that we know we don't know. But there are also unknown unknowns. There are things we don't know we don't know. Now, people sort of laughed at that, but it was actually brilliant. By the way, it wasn't original. It came from somewhere else, but it made a big impression, because most people thought this is ridiculous, but it's actually brilliant. So how do we know we know? In order to know what we know, we have to ask, what is knowledge? We have to know what knowledge is. I'm coming to the statues. Don't worry about it. I'm gradually getting there. So knowledge is it's assumed that knowledge is and truth are connected. It's assumed. I'm not so sure. We're gonna look at that. We are more inclined to accept knowledge from disciplines that we don't know about, or from people who know about things that we don't know about. So we will accept people who know about science. We'll accept it because we just don't know, which is very strange, by the way. But knowledge today, well, it has been going on since about Plato, is justified true belief. That is the sort of key. So the question about knowledge is as old as philosophy itself, from Plato. Plato first asked the question. So you say, I believe something, and that something is true, and therefore I'm justified in believing that. Well, that people have been talking about this now for so long, and I'm not very impressed with it. I have to tell you. But let's give an example. It's winter, and you come out of your house, and the streets are wet, and there are clouds up there, and you are justified in believing that it had rained. It had justified true belief. That it is justified, and if there are no clouds in the sky, it could mean that the clouds were there and they'd gone. It's still sort of justified. On the other hand, somebody could have just washed the streets, which is also something. There's something very interesting that Russell said about that. He said that that somebody who comes into a room, Alice comes into a room, and sees it's 2 o'clock. The clock says 2. And that's fair enough. It so happens by coincidence that it is 2 o'clock, but that clock has stopped. It's always 2 o'clock. Is that a justified true belief? That was a huge question, because it was absolute fluke. But it was Gettier, an American philosopher in 1963, who challenged the whole business of justified true belief. Let me give you an example. You're going along the road, and in a field you see a sheep, and you say, "Ah, there's a sheep in that field," and you come along, and when you get close, you see that wasn't a sheep at all. It was a bush that was shaped like a sheep, but behind a rock there is a sheep. Now, was he right? Was that a justified true belief? And he said, actually, no. First of all, was it justified? Yes. Was it true? That's an interesting question. And was it knowledge? An even more interesting question. Now let me give you another example, a different example. Let's say you're walking along the road, and across the street you'll see a coffee shop, and in the window there's a coffee cup, and that's fair enough. And as you go closer and closer, you suddenly see that's not a coffee cup at all. It's a drawing of a coffee cup. Now, were you right? Was it a coffee cup? Are you now right that it's a coffee cup? Were you wrong? Was it a justified true belief that in that coffee bar there was a cup of coffee? So that is something that we need to think about. Now, let me get closer to statues, just a bit closer. David Hume, the philosopher, had some brilliant philosopher, had some opinions about non-white people, however you want to call them. They were not nice opinions, but all scientific evidence pointed to it at the time. The question is, what do we make of that? Are we going to say that Hume was a racist? It was a justified true belief at the time. Okay, so I can now ask, is knowledge connected to understanding? Does one have to understand to have knowledge? And does knowledge have to be true knowledge? Can you have knowledge that is false? Is it knowledge? All right, you who've listened to me before know what I think about truth. So you know what I think about true knowledge. Okay, so my approach is I call it the coffee cup approach. So I say that knowledge is memory, first of all, because you can't have knowledge of something that's not in your head, or something in your head has to be memory, right? So, and not only is it memory, but you would assume that knowledge will continue into the future. It would have to. You can't just say, I know now, I will know in the future. So knowledge is the result of what we know, but knowledge is not static. Knowledge changes according to the information we have. So knowledge must necessarily be approximate, and thus necessarily approximately true. 1 second, approximately true. Since approximate truth is not truth, where does that leave knowledge? Did you want to ask something, Morris?
I wanted to draw a parallel between what you're talking about and the way in which in the West our courts function. That is to say, when somebody is accused of a crime and they're brought before a court, and evidence is brought, and eventually a judgment is made, and we say that they are guilty or they are not guilty, and there are many cases of people being sent to prison for long terms, and then sometime later evidence comes up and the court declares them innocent. Now, they were in fact guilty the first time, and they are innocent the second time, equally.
So,
because
hang on a second. Hang on 1 second. Sorry, Reginald. Sorry, Debbie. I did not notice that you were waiting. I'm so busy. I'm so busy with what's going on. My knowledge completely failed me that I have to look at something. So sorry. Carry on, Morris.
We'll just finish the thought. And the thought is that we have a court because we need one. It's a practical necessity. And the need, knowledge in itself is of no importance. Its practical use is of importance in our lives. And therefore, we make decisions, we decide we have knowledge that serves our purpose. And when evidence or something else changes, we change our knowledge. It was right before and it's right the second time too.
So you're agreeing with me that knowledge is flexible depending on the circumstances. Yes, is that what you're saying?
I'm saying to you, it is a tool in our hands, and we improve that tool with more and more, call it evidence, understanding of our surrounding.
Okay, and it's a flexible tool. I mean, it changes according to how we want to use it. So knowledge is not a definite thing that is unmoving and unchanging. Knowledge can.
One of your sentences earlier I found a difficulty with, because you put together in the same sentence the word knowledge and the word belief, and these two are opposites. Or at least they're not the same thing at all, and it's all belief.
That is a very extreme thing to say, which I'm not saying it's wrong. I think it's right. I think that it is all belief, but the point of justified true belief is the key that philosophers are sort of hanging on to, and I am as skeptical about it as you are about
justified. The word justified even suggests a court making a decision.
Yes. Okay. Fair enough. But don't forget, it is a key that's been used for like 2,000 years. It's a way of explaining what knowledge is. I don't agree with it as much as you don't. But wiser people, well, it can't be wiser, but older people than us have talked about it in those terms: justified true belief. And they've all got to fit together, and I don't see it either. Okay, so anybody else while we're at it? Frank, yes.
I think that knowledge changes over time because it's a question of interpretation, and it's also a question of perception, and therefore it is very subjective. And what was once knowledge and perception 1,000 years ago is not the same mental capacity that we have today, and we see things differently. Therefore, an interpretation of the same knowledge then is completely different today. Now, if we talk about belief, and we're talking about something, perhaps religion, we talk about belief, there's no rational argument here. It's a person who believes he has the truth, and you can't argue with him rationally. In his eyes, he has the truth, and that's the end of the argument. But in the Middle Ages, they tried to combine rationality and belief. And for instance, some scholars said, I know because I believe. And that was their argument. And that's the way they managed to sort of come to a truth about God.
Neil. Yes,
I mean, the reason belief is in there is if we don't believe something, we definitely don't know it. You know, it's... And I think I agree with you that the word that causes the most problem in there is true, because we actually don't know what's true. So it's a strange part of the definition.
Yes, I agree. Keith, yeah.
Well, we seem to have a bunch of words here that we're trying to discriminate between. So we've got knowledge, we've got truth, we've got belief, we've got. Well, I'm going to introduce accuracy, and we've got know, to know something. I was just wondering if you have false beliefs, are they still knowledge? So are they still knowledge? I mean, you have people who are conspiracy theorists and believe all sorts of nonsense. They think they have knowledge about these things, but we would disagree. We would say it's incorrect. It's untrue. Is knowledge just memory? The fact that it's in there is that knowledge, or does it have to be? Does it have to be confirmed as being correct, as being accurate, in order for it to be knowledge? How do we define this word with more precision?
Very, very, very good points, Keith. The whole business of justified true belief. If you believe in conspiracy theory, you are definitely justified, because you got hundreds of people telling you all sorts of rubbish that's pouring in. You're definitely justified in believing all sorts of stuff. It's justified. It's belief, and it seems to be true. As so many people are saying it, then presumably it's true, and it becomes knowledge, and that's dangerous. So I agree with you. We've got words here that we have to unpack, and I'm not sure that we can. I think that the only way we can think about knowledge is the way that a few of you have said, that knowledge changes. Knowledge is something that is known at one point, that is known, and it's absolutely justified. It's what science tells you. It's what philosophers tell you. Therefore, it's justified, and it's true. The problem is that when you get to today, can you look back and say that well, they were wrong? I mean, what right have we to say they were wrong then? Right? It's so let's move on a little bit. Is that okay? Anybody got anything else at the moment? So no, knowledge can be a weapon, right? There is forbidden knowledge, that which others don't want us to know. Okay, there's forgotten knowledge. Can knowledge be forgotten? I mean, how would you possibly have knowledge that's forgotten if it will only be knowledge when it's come back again, when somebody reminds you of it? Frank, yeah.
I mean, if we go back in time and we look at the Library of Alexandria, which held most of the scrolls and the written knowledge up to the 8th century, and then was burnt, and all that knowledge disappeared, mainly. A great deal of it disappeared, and therefore we are lacking knowledge. Most of the knowledge that exists or did exist, we do not know about, because of the fact that for 2,000 years of knowledge went up in flames.
Yeah, but yes, true. But that's not knowledge, it's forgotten. We know there was something, but it's not knowledge anymore. It's gone. It's gone.
Forgotten knowledge, yeah.
Well, all we know is that there was something there, but knowledge that's forgotten, I don't know that that's knowledge. It just is a blank.
If you know something and you die, does it cease to exist?
Of course.
Well, the thing itself doesn't cease to exist, but your particular storage of it ceases to exist. That's all.
Yeah, it exists for the one for whom it had existed. I mean, it's gone for that one.
But there's the memory.
Not the one who's dead has no memories, unfortunately. Only people left behind will know the knowledge that person had.
They have the memories of that knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah, the people who are left.
It's like deleting a file, isn't it?
Yes. Yes, that's.
I think Neil wants to speak.
Yes, I can.
Yes, we can transfer knowledge, through books and other media. It doesn't have to sit and be in somebody's head.
Would that be would that be information or knowledge?
That's an interesting one.
Yes.
I have to think about that.
Reginald.
Yeah, it's Ellie.
Hello, Ellie.
Hi. Just thinking, is as knowledge is being made, that it's something that when we participate together, there's a consensus that we are understanding something between us being made, and in that realm we are forming a form of knowledge between us.
So knowledge can only be between people and not individual?
Different, if we're thinking of knowledge as a phenomena that we think we are relating to, then I would say that we make knowledge between us in I think I'm just thinking in terms of language.
Does that include carnal knowledge?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, does a computer have knowledge? Well, that is just information, isn't it? So how about an animal? An animal remembers lots of things.
And language.
Does the animal have knowledge? Is it only a human? Yeah, is it only a human characteristic? I think it's very much based in the human brain. We talk about knowledge when it's contained by a human. I've never heard of anybody saying that an animal has knowledge. They say an animal has memory, but I've never heard of anyone using the word knowledge in relation to an animal, certainly not a computer, but only a human. So it seems to be special.
Is knowledge then shown by what we do? What we're capable of? Is that a reflection of what knowledge we have?
A dog knows when it's time for its dinner, or when its owner says it's time for a walk. The dog knows that it's going to go for a walk. It has that level of consciousness.
Yeah, and I mean, a cat, anyone's got a cat, you'll know your cat knows your local area. Will know how to get to its different homes in the country that it goes to for an extra meal or whatever.
If I want to have a huge quarrel with somebody, there are a couple of subjects. One is free will.
Ooh.
I can explode any party within 5 minutes with free will. And another thing is, if you talk about animal intelligence, people who've got animals will kill you if you say that animals are not as clever as humans. They will literally leap up and bite you. And that's the human owner, not the animal. So I don't even want to talk about animal knowledge, because people are really they got animal that animal is really clever, highly intelligent, etc., etc. So I'm inclined to, and I prefer to talk about human knowledge. The other part is just too complicated because we basically don't know. Ellie, as far as what you're saying is, I just want to get this clear. You're saying that if somebody has knowledge and doesn't impart it, that's not knowledge. That's individual knowledge. That's not knowledge. It has to be given over to somebody else for it to be knowledge.
No, I'm not drawing that distinction. I'm just considering knowledge as something that we is constructed between us. It derives from a social context in our, yeah.
So you've got to have more than one person who knows it. So if only one person knows something, it's not knowledge. They has to be shared in order to be knowledge. So,
or how we acquire knowledge from birth, say, is from a social context.
Well, supposing I discover something and I haven't told anybody yet, is that knowledge, or is it only knowledge when I've shared it with somebody?
Is it knowledge? Would it be knowledge for me, or is it only just knowledge for you?
No, I'm just going by your idea there. If I discovered something unique and only I knew it, would I have the knowledge yet, or have I only got the knowledge once I've shared it with somebody?
It might have been David Hume, I might be mistaken there, but didn't one some philosophers write that nearly all knowledge we have is from testimony. Either somebody's told us it, or we've read it somewhere. There's very few things that we acquire independent knowledge that we acquire independently. Most of it is
I definitely agree with that, because I said that knowledge is memory. Therefore, it must be somewhere for it to come out. It has to be in our minds in order for it to be known. It won't come out of nowhere. That's what you're saying.
Yes.
Yeah, somebody's told.
Morris?
Maybe it has to have
I don't want to seem morbid if I constantly talk about death.
Well, you are.
When you talk, that's true. It's true. But earlier you said you talked about Adam and Eve and their acquisition of knowledge, which was a bad thing. What they learned, one could say, is that we are mortal, and the understanding that we are mortal and that we die is what philosophy comes to try to help us deal with. That is knowledge. Where do we get that knowledge from? Isn't that something that we learn as we see people around us passing away, that we see things disintegrating, falling to pieces? Is that knowledge?
I'd say there's, well, what I was going to mention was inferential knowledge. So not something you directly perceive, but something which you are compelled, or perhaps only some of us are compelled to accept because it's implied by circumstance. So perhaps that's the issue there.
I'm wondering if it only becomes knowledge, the information that you have only becomes knowledge if you understand it. So knowledge is information with understanding. Because
that's a very good question. A very good question. I wonder. Can you have knowledge that you don't understand? That you're asking, you can't have knowledge that you don't understand?
Yes, it may just be information if you don't understand it.
Okay.
We can call it knowledge once you understand it.
That's fair. Yeah. Sounds fair. Yeah, sounds fair. Frank, you wanted to say something?
Well, first of all, I'm saying that you're talking about people having to transfer knowledge from one to the other, having at least two people together. But what about monks or isolated people who live all their lives alone and write books and come up with ideas and have knowledge? They don't share it with other people.
But we don't know they have knowledge until they write it down.
But they write books and we get their knowledge. We get their knowledge because some of the greatest people who've transferred knowledge have been monks. And
if they didn't write it down at all, would that be knowledge? Eli says no, I think.
No. We only know what knowledge is if we get it. If we get it. But getting the knowledge is not necessarily what we understand. Because everybody interprets knowledge differently. Knowledge is a question of interpretation and change. And we build on knowledge. All the knowledge we have today is knowledge which has been built on previously. And that's the way inventions are made, That's the way you get discoveries. We're standing on the dwarfs, standing on the shoulders of giants and that sort of thing. That's what it's all about.
If we don't know there are giants, can we stand on them?
Well, metaphorically, yes.
Can I make a comment?
You could stand on anybody, I suppose.
Yes, Isaac, please do.
On a everyday level, I fix things, and sometimes I'm working on something and I don't know quite how to organize it, and then all of a sudden I do something completely unusual and different and it works. Is that knowledge? Does that become knowledge because I've found a new way of doing something?
Yeah. You've gained insight. How about another word?
Well, it's a type of knowledge which is knowing how to do something. It's not a fact, it's just, I know how to cook something or whatever.
Isaac says that he's getting he's getting something from somewhere. He just like that, out of nowhere. Something happens, some skill, something happens. That's what you're saying. I suppose it then becomes knowledge, doesn't it?
Well, he's synthesized existing information and produced a new piece of information. So he's thought it through. It's not just a random act. I suppose maybe fixing things could sometimes be random, but often it's a process of thinking through the problem and then coming to a solution.
Sometimes you learn how to do something which has got no intellectual content at all, really. It's just you learn how to do it. Learning to walk, for example. I know how to walk. There's no.
But you may produce some new ideas about how to walk. You may have your own unique way of walking. Everybody walks differently, don't they? Everybody has their own unique walk.
Yeah, there's a funny walk.
You've created something new out of existing information.
These are acquired habits.
New knowledge.
Walking, running are acquired habits.
Some of my best ideas come when I walk. So there you have it. Anyway, coming back to Adam and Eve for a second, I'm not sure, Maurice, that if they hadn't done that thing with the Apple business, and if the boss hadn't been so pissed off with them, they would have lived forever. So apart from the knowledge,
there's another side to it.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other side to it is that they were innocent concerning sex. That's another side of it. And when they got that knowledge, they understood that there's a difference between male and female. And that was one of the main concerns about the knowledge. And therefore they covered themselves up after that.
Maybe we're getting a little bit too much into the
into Freud. We're getting into here. Freud now.
Only because what preceded that was that the first being was hermaphrodite and divided into male and female. Adam's rib was taken.
Well, actually, I can go even further back. I can say that before Eve, there was Lilith. Lilith was the woman in there.
Okay.
I think you're being heretical here, Frank. So there is.
Wasn't the apple a metaphor for some wicked deed that's fun, that's enjoyable, and probably sex, isn't it? Is it not a metaphor for sex? The eating of the apple? I would think probably.
They were playing with themselves.
No, regarding
playing with each other, I think.
They didn't know what they were doing. They were innocent. Augustine, yes.
Yeah, it's the idea of the myth of Adam and Eve. It's quite funny because it actually responds to what is called the myth of the Promethean, basically. So the Promethean myth is the standard myth, and it recurs in the Genesis. So it's the same story, basically, by some divine intervention. In this case, it's the snake. They get the knowledge, but the standard myth, which is the myth of Prometheus, is that divine entity that gives the knowledge to humans. And the difference between these myths, you can find it in any culture, but the difference in Christian culture is that basically Adam and Eve are guilty because they acquired the knowledge. While in the other stories is the divine entity who gives the knowledge to them, and they have no part in the action. It's called. There's an anthropologist that calls it the mytheme of the Promethean mytheme, which is the acquisition of knowledge, and the idea that knowledge is a divine part of us, according to religions and myths.
Okay, we have to move on to statues. So I know you're waiting for the statues, and here we go. So there is purposefully changed knowledge, right? Knowledge that is changed, that people do it on purpose. For example, Orwell's 1984 is a typical example. There was a knowledge change in the Soviet Union. There's a knowledge in North Korea that's fed to everybody. There's erasing history, which is they're destroying have destroyed the Berlin Wall. I mean, destroying the Berlin Wall is destroying history. I mean, when that's gone completely, people won't even know about it. If they just leave a little bit, maybe that'll help. I'll give you a current example about history being changed about the Second World War. That there were lots of countries involved in the Second World War, but not Germany. It's the Nazis. The Nazis invaded the Soviet Union. There was the British and the Italians and the French and the Japanese, but no Germans. The reason, of course, was that all being one country, European Union, etc., and I keep on reading about these Nazis doing things, and I'm wondering where the Germans were. In a few generations, kids won't know Germans were in the war, and if they were, they must have been on our side. That's history being changed before our very, very eyes. So, do new facts become new knowledge? There is false knowledge, which one of you mentioned. False knowledge, which is during the 1980s, I think. A lot of actors and actresses. Are you allowed to say actress today? Well, actors and actors. Suddenly they all came out. They were abused as children, and amazing stuff came out one after the other. Found out that a lot of it was just not true. It was just false knowledge. So where do you go from that? So now we're getting closer to the main thing, which is statues. But we're not there yet. We're not there. We have to go through a forest to get to the statues, because to get to the statues, which is an awkward part, where I'm softening you up. You're going to be so worn out by the time you get to the statues, you'll accept everything I say. So we're going to now
we give up now.
I don't.
White flag.
I don't.
I was going to say that anybody who comes out of this without a headache has got me to answer to. It means you weren't listening. All right. So the tree in the forest was the old thing.
Shut the door, please, Helen.
Pardon?
Oh. I think Neil is right.
The tree in the forest was if a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears the sound, nobody hears it. Did it make a sound? I'm not going to go into that. Don't start. The answer is, I mean, we can talk about this for ages. It was Berkeley who started this lark, and it went on for a long time. It's a lot of rubbish. But everybody will go and argue about whether there's a sound and whether ears have to hear, but that's not the point, because so I prefer to move it a bit further, as I did in my book, which is if a tree falls in a forest and nobody knows about it, was there a tree? Oh, now that is a different problem, a real problem, right? So the answer to that, this is very annoying for non-philosophers. People go crazy if I ask that question. Yeah, well, of course there was, but what does that mean there was? If nobody knew there was a tree, how could there have been a tree? But actually, before you start arguing with me about it, because I really can't be bothered to go into it, you have to read the book to do that. But the point is, it's a trick question, because as soon as I say, if there's a tree in a forest, I've already put it in your mind that there was a tree in a forest, and the whole thing's lost. Because if there's a tree in a forest and it fell, what it might have done, it might not have done, but I can't even pose that to you without mentioning a tree in a forest. So the whole thing is a load of rubbish. So we're not going to discuss that, right? We are now moving on to that, because we're moving very, very steadily onto statues, but not yet. So if we know what a tree is, right, and we know what a forest is, right, being told that a tree fell it's knowledge. If afterwards we are told that, well, actually I lied, a tree did not fall, was the knowledge I had before false? And can I believe the second one if I didn't believe the first one? Conditionals are problematic. Is it possible that a tree fell in a forest? Yes. Does it mean it did? No. So, if we are told that a tree fell, would we have knowledge that it did? Which I asked. Yes, but only if we believe that the tree fell. Here we get to justified true belief again. So belief, then the information was true. Okay, so let me tell you about Popeye, which is much more interesting. Those of you who heard it before, or those of you who read the book, I'll say it again, it's a lovely story. In 1870, a bloke called Erich von Wolf, he did a whole lot of tests on vegetables, and found that in the laboratory, and iron and all that, and all written out, and they found that after his experiments, they found out that spinach had enormous amount of iron, enormous, 35 milligrams per portion or something. And that this was fantastic. And from then on, everybody ate spinach and all the films, etc., etc. What they found out in 1937, that the bloke who transcribed the information actually did put the dot in the wrong place. It wasn't 35, it was 3.5. So all this stuff that people had known about and believed was actually not true. The question is, was it true then, or was it not true then? And how can you say it wasn't true? Whatever answer you give is wrong or right, depending which way you look at it, because you can't say it was wrong then. It was only wrong today, looking back. But at the time, there it was. There was the evidence. It was true. It was justified true belief. Okay, so can you know information that is false, that turns out to be false? Before November 2016, everybody believed that Hillary Clinton would win the election in the States. Everybody. I mean, the evidence was there. All the polls showed it. So can you now say that in 2016 Hillary Clinton was going to win?
Win. She won the popular vote.
Yes, Neil.
Can we be said to know anything about the future at all? I mean, we could all disappear in 10 seconds' time. I could say that that's going to happen, and nobody could say it wasn't true.
Neil, I will pay you later. That's about what I was going to say.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No. Don't be sorry. It's great. No. That's wonderful.
If someone had said that Hillary Clinton will definitely win, then they're in no position to say that. It's a false claim. I mean, it's down to probability. She may win, she may not win. For someone to say that she definitely will win, he's making a false claim. It's unsubstantiated. It's of no value.
It's only a false. Keith, it's only a false claim now. It was a false evidence
because it was unconfirmed.
No, of course, but the evidence was quite clear, wasn't it? That all the polls showed it.
Well, clearly it wasn't. It didn't go that way. So
exactly.
So the evidence was obviously misleading. You said
it had no value. You said it was no, and that I think is the key. That is the key, because it is the value of the knowledge that is of any importance at all. If the knowledge has no value, then it doesn't matter whether it turns out later to have been wrong or true or false. We need but we need something to help us every day in our lives in understanding our universe and our surroundings and ourselves. And what we know at this moment, with the evidence we have, is what we know, and we'll know something different tomorrow. We act on what we know today, and maybe we're making big mistakes according to what we'll know tomorrow. But in the meantime, that's what we have. That is what gives us our ability to continue to navigate our lives.
I think the public are much more aware of false news today than ever before, and hence we all use the phrase fake news every day now, and we all are very skeptical, and we all have different channels showing different expectations of politics and affairs and what's going on in the world, and we can see much more. We're a global village today. It's a completely different kettle of fish. We live in a world of extremes, complete extremes, and the knowledge is changing all the time. And there's no such thing as truth. Truth is very subjective. I mean, using the word truth is ridiculous. Anyway, what is truth? You should use factual knowledge. Facts. Are facts true? No, you shouldn't use the word true, because facts have always been disproved.
Yes, Reg.
I have a different framework to work from, and one is that information is information. It's out there. The problem is accessing it. Information is neither true nor false. It's just there, but we have problems accessing it. The second one is that what turns what information we can gather into knowledge seems to me to be a series of rules which are in our heads, which turn it into something useful. And here I do agree with Maurice. There's two things about knowledge. One is it's got to be useful. And the other thing is we live in a dynamic world, a world where to survive, we have to have some means of predicting the future. And that's where the rules are important that can turn this information into knowledge, which we can then use in the world and helps us survive. But we don't do that with a great degree of, well, you could say we do it successfully enough to continue surviving, or we have done up to now. We can get away with an awful lot of false information. We can survive and live with a lot of things that just aren't true. But it seems to me that that's the framework to work from.
I have a problem with when you said that I have a problem.
Don't tell me about those.
When you said that information is just information, is not true or false, that's problematic. There is false information, isn't there?
There's false knowledge, but I think that the universe that is accessible is neither true nor false. It just is.
Or we have an understanding of it at a moment in time.
A moment in time. We
don't necessarily agree.
No, you obviously. Not only did you not listen to it before, but you haven't read my book either. Would never say a moment in time in my presence, and I say presence, right? So.
Okay, erase what I just said then.
I've erased it. I'm horrified.
We can only know about the past anyway.
Oh,
well done.
There's a man after my own heart. Neil, I invite you again.
All right, thank you.
You're right. I mean, yes.
So the word "no" is obviously connected with the word "knowledge," isn't it? So just going back to the Hillary Clinton thing, if we're wondering if there was knowledge that Hillary Clinton would win, it's like me saying I know that Donald Trump's going to win the election next time. You know, the statement is of no value whatsoever, because I can't make that prediction, and so it'll just be dismissed as a random statement. Maybe I can back it up with some sort of evidence, but it'll be there will be plenty of evidence to to go against it, to say that, that's not the case. And just going back to you're telling us that a tree is falling in the forest. Can we say the fact that you've told us a tree is fallen in the forest? Can we say, oh yeah, a tree is fallen in the forest? Well, no. All we can say is, I would just say, Ron said a tree has fallen in the forest.
Never said that. Never.
Now that's
never.
Accurate.
Never.
That's accurate. That. But for me to go a stage further and say a tree has fallen in the forest would mean that I'm assuming that you were correct in the first place, that you were giving me correct information. And as you said, you may not be giving me correct information, you may be giving me false information. So for me to be sure that I'm communicating something that is actually true and accurate, I would just have to say that Ron said it happened, not that it did happen, because I cannot be sure that it did actually happen.
Keith, I deny I've ever said a tree fell in a forest, ever. I deny it completely. Okay?
Well, I recorded it. I have
No. My thing was, no. That's the whole point.
Yeah, and I have witnesses and with strong affidavits.
Yeah, we can
record it.
I will delete the recording anyway. The point is, my point was.
You're talking about lying now, Lucy.
Yes.
It's different. We're going on to something new.
I said that if a tree falls in the forest and nobody knows about it, was there a tree? That was my thing. And the whole point was that as soon as I say, talk about a tree, you already have it in your mind. So I agree with you. But I never talked about a tree. All I said was, if a tree fell in the forest, was there a tree? And so therefore there could have been a tree that fell in the forest. But I haven't said that. You have not heard the words from me. I would have to have.
No, I was using that as an example.
Okay, I accept.
I wasn't saying that you've actually said it today, that you may have done. I don't know, but I was using that as an example. Anyway.
That's fair enough, Keith. I'm with you there.
I don't even expect that there was a forest.
What happens if there wasn't a forest?
That's even well. I don't care.
Yeah.
I think actually the statement of the question, I think it has a clear answer. Yes, there was a tree, of course, because there was a forest, and a forest is a set of trees. A forest is a lot of trees put together. Hence, there was a tree. Did it fall? Did it not fall? I don't know, but there was a tree. It doesn't matter whether it fell or not, because it was in the forest. A better example would be, there is a tree in the field, and it fell. There was a tree at all? Maybe, but in the forest is a set of trees.
But if you don't know the tree or a forest, then we're not saying anything until I actually mention the word tree and forest. If I don't mention them at all, then there's nothing there for you to grasp.
But that will be a tautology, basically. That will be something fell down somewhere.
No, not necessarily. I don't care about something falling anywhere. The point is, if I don't put that into your head, then you won't be able to talk to me about it. And I haven't put it in your head, so it doesn't exist. I'm going to delete the tape. No tree, no forest, right? But I've said it again. So therefore, there might be a tree and there might be a forest. Now I'm not going to say it again. Forget it.
Do we understand from that there are no statues either?
No, there are, because we're getting to them bit by bit by bit. But you have to be patient. Because
the statue fell in the forest.
Yes.
Was there a statue at all?
So we were talking about the future. So I'm like you've all said. I would ask: is future knowledge justified? That's a difficult one. And I say no. Like you've all said, because we don't know it's true. We can't ever get to the future. We can't predict the future. And are
you telling me that it is impossible for you to say with absolute certainty that you know that one day you will die?
No, but you've read the book, you see. You're cheating.
That's the only way he knows we're going to die, because he read the book.
The only thing we know about the future, the only thing, is that we're going to die. That's it. But we don't know that's the only thing. All the rest of it.
Okay, but now you've established the principle.
Elongated. Whereas they sort out the telomeres when we won't die. Elongated telomeres.
Okay.
There you go.
So
you can't be 100% sure.
Well, the universe will come to an end at some point. Well, maybe we're not sure.
We don't know
about
when the universe comes.
Well, we asked what is it that dies?
Pardon? Sorry. Again?
What is it of us that dies?
All of it.
Well, our consciousness is the main thing, isn't it? That's what we're mostly interested in. The rest of it just comes along with it to keep it going.
Yeah, okay, fair enough.
There's a possibility that science will prevent dying.
Mm.
Yeah, people always thought that. You know, they buried Lenin, and because they were big scientists, they said that Lenin's going to come to life again because we got the science, and one day he's going to come to life again.
Well, wait, what's the hurry?
Hasn't worked yet.
Wait.
He's shrinking bit by bit.
Yeah.
So
you can pay thousands of dollars to a company in America to have yourself frozen.
Yeah.
Yeah. The Cryogenics Foundation. Yeah.
Yeah, that must be fun.
$35,000 to be honest.
Yep.
To be concrete.
I don't think Putin wants him to come alive again.
Anyway, so I'm saying that no future knowledge is true. Okay, it's knowledge only in retrospect. That is when the facts can be seen. Only afterwards you can see whether it came about. And you're right to say that that in 2016 that we said that Hillary would win is ridiculous, and I agree with you, because we could only see afterwards that was a mistake, because we just cannot predict. We can't. We can only see if our prediction comes to life afterwards in retrospect. And now moving on very, very rapidly, gradually towards the statue, but not yet. I want to talk about a real tree. I think Dan's gone. What a pity. The only American is left. Okay, so in the American Civil War, General Albert Sidney Johnston of the Confederate Army was shot. He was the highest ranking soldier ever killed in that war, right? And it was in 1862 in the Battle of Shiloh. Anyway, there's a tree stump at the place where he was shot, right? It become an icon, and everybody, well, all the people who care about things go there to that tree. And there was a whole business going on long before the statue thing, that they wanted to uproot that tree, and they said, no, under no circumstances, it's history, etc., etc. But what they found out, that tree could not have possibly have been there at the time, and it's still an icon, and they still don't want it removed because it's an icon. It has nothing to do with that general. It couldn't have been there, and it's an icon. So now we come to statues, and our one American is left, which is a pity, but still. Can we apply the principle of justified true belief to the statue of someone whose views today are abhorrent? Is it justified true belief that the statue is of the person? Well, yes, let's say. Okay, so if that is the statue of the person who did terrible things, we already know that is the man, which is like the tree, right? We're in a great circle here. Okay, so the problem begins when we step back to ask if it is a justified true belief of the man's history. Now here we get into deep water. Is it all of his history? Is it some of his history? Was all his history terrible? So a statue is true, and so is a tree. So knowledge is impaired in both cases because we don't have all the information. What do we do about that statue, by the way? It's
if I can.
yes.
Well, the statue represents a part of the person's life, doesn't represent the whole, and it depends how significant the bad bits are. I suppose you could always chip a bit off, couldn't you, to represent the bad bit, but that may not satisfy many people. If the bad parts of that person's life are highly significant, then you may have a case for pulling the statue down. But it depends on the proportion of badness within that person's life.
If we find that person did amazingly good things, I mean terrific things, but he was a racist, a slave owner, or whatever, but he did amazing stuff, that's where we get to history. Yes, Frank.
But in my opinion, this whole business of the statues is really connected to the concept of time and memory. And what's happening here today, the people are applying today's values, today's concepts, and their mentality to, let's say, being politically correct today, and sort of sticking them on to the ancient statues, which really represent a different mentality, a different era, a different concept. And it's not for us to say completely what is wrong and what is right. Although I can absolutely identify with people who look at statues like General Lee and say, well, he sort of represents racism and the evil Confederacy and everything else. But we have to look at it differently. If a statue has gone through a time, say 200 years, the test of time, then it's undergone a certain consensus among the general public. In other words, if you've got a liberal democratic republic which accepts a statue, then you have to accept the statue for what it was then and not today. But on the other hand, I can understand statues that have been broken down, like statues of Stalin and Lenin and Saddam Hussein, because they've undergone really a tremendous revolutionary change from a regime of authoritarian regime, from fascism to of oppression, to a sudden hope of obtaining a liberal regime. Therefore, we can understand what those statues represent, because they're knocked down today. But knocking down ancient statues, I think, is knocking down history. In other words, it's going along with the idea of revisionism in the history. Revisionism in the history is applying today's values to yesterday's values, which are different completely.
Yes, Neil.
Well, there was a General Lee's. General Lee was not was only popular with the Confederacy. I mean, there were people fighting against him. So I think the problem with the Confederate statues is that although the Confederacy lost, the values that they believed in kind of resurfaced after the Reconstruction era, and they managed to oppress the black population through other means, and that lasted until the 1960s. And I think this is what, so that was 100 years later. So I don't think it's true to say that everybody in America, would have seen Lee as a hero. Half of them would have seen him as an enemy. So, but I see your point that if you look at historical figures, there's very few who, if they appeared on a political talk program today, you wouldn't say, "Oh God, that's terrible," what they say and what they think.
Yeah, my question is, wasn't everyone in the past captive of their time and culture? I mean, we are looking back. Yes, Morris.
Can I just ask a question? Maybe somebody can explain to me what the point of a statue is. I mean, I don't really understand why we should put up a lump of stone that,
Yes.
that purports to look like somebody, and expect that it's going to produce some sort of reaction in those who see it, without taking into account that we have motives behind our erecting this particular figure. Can you explain to me why we need to have statues?
Well,
Yes, they're aspirational.
Yeah, I can.
Well, Keith and I were in a discussion about this very topic, and our conclusion was that we should tear down all statues and never erect any again, and then we will not have all this controversy.
We'll stick them in museums.
Yes.
I remember. I remember when we saw pictures on television of ISIS knocking down the statues in Palmyra of the ancient gods of Babylon, and how the Western world looked at this barbaric attack, and papers were full of disgust. How this could happen? How could they do such a terrible thing? And here, once again, we are watching people throwing statues into the river or knocking them down, and there's a great similarity here. But on the other hand, Maurice, you asked what is the purpose of statues? Well, every civilization had a different purpose. The Romans and the Greeks wanted to idealize their Roman leaders, their generals, and their emperors, and therefore it was for the glorification of the individual. Later on, I think statues such as Winston Churchill and other famous figures represent not just the person, but what the person stands for. It is symbolic of a certain age, of a certain event or a number of events. And therefore, when you look at a statue, you don't just see the person himself, you look at what that person stands for.
But then I think the real point will be whether the value of the statue or the value of the person that we are immortalizing there forever, is it a good value or a bad value? Is it to show glory of history, or is there for showing either darkness and whiteness of history?
So, well, each culture, each civilization looks at it differently. I'll give you an example. In Belgium, in Brussels, if you stand outside the parliament, there's a statue there of one of the leaders of the Crusaders who went into Jerusalem, the Holy Land, on the First Crusade and became King of Jerusalem. And there's a huge equestrian statue there today, which everybody thinks is terrific. And who was this person? This person was a great leader as regards the Catholic Church, because he went in to take the Holy Land from the infidels, as they say. But on the other hand, what did the Crusaders do? They slaughtered hundreds of thousands of people. So it depends, how you look at it. There are two ways of looking at these things, and it depends on the civilization you're talking about. As somebody already said, there is not one statue virtually you can put up where you can't find something wrong. Even Churchill, for example, right?
Yeah.
Every statue has something wrong. But the question is, how important is as somebody said, the good part and the more negative parts? What do they represent? What can it say for you? People like to feel, they like to get the feel of history. There's nothing like a statue to get the feel of history. That's why we go to museums, right? To see lumps of stone and things like that. We get a sense of history that way.
Yeah.
Apart from just reading books.
How about if we don't take a stone or a metal structure, but instead we take the real person, and we say that a leader, let's say Donald Trump, has so many bad things we could say about him. But on the other hand, supposing he does something very, very good, he does it meaning to do something quite different, but it turns out really well. Now, here is somebody who we can say is, on one hand, we disapprove of, but on the other hand, has done something good. What is he? Should we vote for him? Do we approve of him? Do we support him? And every human being has within him many different sides. By turning the human being into a stone representation. We can't do away with parts of him we don't like. We have to accept people as they are. So maybe it's better not to have statues, and also not to have such enormous leaders.
Well, one thing I think about everything is that there's a knowledge associated with things, and there's an emotion associated with things, and it's sort of, the knowledge is variable. So I remember many years ago looking at the statue of Cromwell outside Parliament, didn't really know who Cromwell was. I know a lot more about Cromwell now. That statue means the knowledge associated with that statue for me is very different now to what it was before. Equally, there can be an emotional response, particularly with things like statues and visual representations. And what we are doing is we are resolving the conflicts that arise as a result of the knowledge which it throws up for us, and the emotions which it throws up for us. So some knowledge, or information perhaps, some knowledge, some information has very little emotional response and doesn't connect with very much other information, and the whole thing can be a very sort of dead experience. Other things can throw up a lot of emotions and a lot of knowledge, which can be very variable and has very different effects on different people. And I think statues are an example of that sort of information category, that knowledge and emotional balance being brought to the fore very dramatically.
I think that statues show us what we want to see. I'll never forget, I went to the south of the United States, and I looked at statues down there, and I got history that I was amazed. This was the exact opposite to what I know from the north, but complete opposite. I went to see description of John. Somebody's coming in. Of John Brown, and it was incredible. He was a hero, and there was this and the, hi Camilla, and there was this and there was that, and I was absolutely stunned. And the fact that we look at statues or at art and we get out of it what we want to get out, and when we knock down statues, what part of it are we knocking down, and are we supposed to say that person was 80% good and we don't worry about the 20%, and who says he was good, and does he bother somebody who passes by, and should we knock him down? All these things are reflected in the way we see things. So I don't know what it does to knock down statues, apart from helping a lot of people who are bothered by them. And so it's a huge problem. Some of the statues that are up and been up for a long time are hugely problematic. If we think of Titus's arch in Rome, I mean, what is that? It celebrates the Roman destruction of the Jewish people and the sending of their remnants as slaves to the diaspora. I mean, that thing is up, it's magnificent. And if you're going to talk about destroying stuff that's bad and gives you a bad history, here's one that should be destroyed. Nobody thinks about it. There are other statues in Rome just as bad.
I disagree with you. I disagree with you.
Which part?
With these, when you're talking about the Arch of Titus in Rome, the Romans built it because for them it was a huge victory. It was a tremendous victory. They had a very hard time destroying the temple and putting down that revolt. It was one of the few revolts which they had so much trouble with, and therefore they built this arch. For the Jewish people, of course, it represents absolute slavery and destruction. They looked at it on their side. They were the victors. The victors wrote the history, right? and they built the arches. Well, all the arches in the Forum, the Roman Forum, are all built on Roman victories. And who suffered? That's why you got slavery, and that's why you got oppressed nations.
Yeah, Neil.
Yeah. Right. I went to Sofia in Bulgaria a couple of years ago, and there's a gigantic memorial to Soviet army soldiers who were killed. And they hummed and hawed about this after communism fell. Decided to leave it because it wasn't a statue of Stalin. It was a tribute to ordinary people who happened to be soldiers. But what the people of Sofia have done, every so often, they take spray paint, and there's a frieze with soldiers on it. So they paint them as Wonder Woman and Superman and Batman, and so they kind of make fun of it without destroying it, because the paint can be removed, and people do it every couple of years. So maybe there's a creative. Also in Glasgow, there's a statue of the Duke of Wellington, and every night somebody puts a traffic cone on top of the statue, and the police come and remove it the next day, and then it gets replaced, etc.
Why don't they like him?
I was going to say that we need.
Why don't they like the Duke of Wellington?
I don't think they dislike it. It's just a bit of fun.
We need to think about what the purpose of the statue is, and it's there as an example, isn't it? It's there as a role model. It's there to communicate ideas to people who come past and see it, and when it's old, young people will see it, and it'll have some plaque on there saying this person is here because he did this and that, and it'll be an example to young people, and they'll say, wow, this is great, I should do this as well. He's had a statue made, he must have been good with the stuff that he was doing. But I think if you see it as installation art, then whatever happens to it is part of that process. So if then you pull the thing down, that is part of the process. So then you've got the situation where you've got, okay, there was a statue here, and it was there because this guy did these things, but he did some bad things as well, and it was pulled down. So that's sort of part of the whole idea, the whole part of what's being communicated. And what Neil was just saying before about people messing around with the statues, sticking cones on their heads and painting them and things, more communication going on. Maybe not just a cone on his head, but if you say they're painting them, some people are saying something else about this person. So by modifying the statue, by making some changes to it, they're saying, well, he did this as well, apart from the thing that's just written on the bottom there that we are told that he's there for. He's done some other stuff as well, and I think you can build on the statue by doing things to it. Yeah, you can pull it down, you can paint it, you can do stuff to it, and that also communicates more ideas about this person's life. So you can add value to your statue as it goes along.
One second. The problem with this discussion is that there's nobody here from the States, and there's no black person here from the States.
Me.
Oh, sorry.
I'm from the States.
Oh, sorry. I didn't notice you just came in.
I'm Camille.
Hi there.
Doesn't look very black to me, though.
No, that's true.
No,
very well. What I mean to say is that the people who've been really hurt by them, we need to hear them. And I thought they'd be here, and I thought they'd be an explosion, and there isn't, because we're more or less of the same. We sort of accept things in the same sort of way. But I mean, people who are really, really hurt by them, we need to hear from them, and we need to hear why they want to destroy them, even though those people might have done good things, but they won't even see any good thing that person's done, and which is a shame, because some of them, the Colston, who was from Bristol, Frank, what was his what's his story apart from being?
Colston was, first of all, he made his money from slaving in the 17th century. He was one of the biggest merchants of the slaves to the Caribbean, but nearly all his money he gave to Bristol to build up the city. And he was a great philanthropist, tremendous philanthropist. And that's the reason why they put up the statue, of course, and that they threw him in the water because of the fact that he made his money on slavery.
And so you see, we've got the problem was the people of the past, that they were all captive of their own time and culture. You need to say that Colson at the time, now to say he was wicked is easy. At the time, that was what people.
Exactly. At the time, there was a different culture and a different attitude. Slavery was an accepted fact. I mean, it's in the Bible, right? Every nation accepted slavery until we got to the 19th century. It was only in the 19th century that we started making the laws that William Wilberforce brought in 1834, the law against slavery. But up to then, it was an accepted way of life. And not for, of course, for the slaves. The poor slaves that had a hell of a time. But for the white man, for the white supremacists, for the colonialists and everything, for the Arab slave traders, that was the way they lived and worked and made their livings.
Keith and I were in a discussion this week about Marcus Aurelius, and one of the people in our discussion said that Marcus Aurelius, if he'd really been as good as he's painted, he ought to have freed all the slaves. And we were sort of saying, well, it wouldn't have been a practical option for him. But
I think there's something, it's a huge issue, and you could talk about women's position at that time. It's like your voice was oppressed. There's a history that's not been spoken about at all from a black perspective, and they haven't had a choice, or it's not been available to them. Thank goodness now they have means through which to express their humiliation, rage. I mean, I think if I had to walk past a statue of someone I know who had raped people, I would want to tear it down. I mean, statues are so emblematic of cultural norms attached to them at a particular moment in time. It's also, I think, the movement that's happening now, it's such a bigger framework that we're thinking about, that it's challenging certain, institutional norms that have just been established over centuries. And thank goodness, anyway, it's a hot subject for me, so I better stop.
No. It's definitely a hot subject. That's what I was afraid of. But it is. That's why it took a long time to get to it, so that we could see what knowledge means. So we've got statues and we've got all this knowledge that we have to take into consideration when we think about going through the streets and knocking down statues of people who did bad things.
But it's like a privileged knowledge in this instance, isn't it?
That's why we're all here. We're all privileged.
Yeah.
I seem to remember mentioning on Thursday the Southwark Pits that Neil was talking about, where we were talking about slavery. I was wondering when the first the first issue of slavery came up. When did somebody publicly say or write down and say, hey, hold on a sec, this slavery business, maybe it's not all it's cracked up to be. Maybe there are a few issues here that we should talk about. And I was sort of wondering who that first person was. We were talking about Marcus Aurelius and wondering whether he actually came up with an idea. Go on, Neil, what were you going to say?
Well, there was usually a distinction between how you treated your own people and how you treated foreigners. You were much more likely to enslave foreigners, but sometimes your own citizens, for instance, if you fell into debt, one of the options for bankruptcy was to sell yourself to your creditor, so you go and work in their kitchens or whatever. And the Bible, there's certainly a distinction there between indentured servitude, which applied to Jews, and slavery, which applied to captives in war and so on. But I say I don't know whether
straight up slavery, really, where the person really doesn't want to be there. They don't want to be a slave. They've done nothing to deserve it, and they just
citizens didn't really come into it, because in ancient Greek, the slaves just weren't citizens.
Yeah.
So we can knock down Plato's statues because Plato, it was completely normal to have slaves, but they weren't citizens, so that was okay. Camille, I think you wanted to say something. Did you have your?
Yes. I think outdoor art is it's public art, and I think it's for everyone. And I don't know if Reginald's wife mentioned about people walking by statues. I'm not even sure people have even seen things that they walk by, you know. So I've been doing some research on, because I'm going to write an article about statues myself, monuments, and what's going on in the United States. But Christopher Columbus, he took the indigenous people and made them slaves, and the king and queen of Spain had him arrested and had him returned. So I mean, that was like on his own to want to have the people do whatever he wanted them to do. I don't know, the United States, it's crazy. You know, I'm an Italian American, I'm proud to be one. And Christopher Columbus statue, I mean, I understand he just did a lot of you know, with the indigenous people, made them slaves. But to, you know, the vandalism that they're doing in Boston, in the North End, which is where Italians live, and there's great Italian restaurants there, and visitors go there. They beheaded him. You know, I mean, it's just insane. I just don't understand why the fury, just because of George Floyd being killed, has just enraged blacks, and there are a lot of whites that are siding with them. And because they're privileged, like white women, college students, they say we're privileged and we understand that they don't have the same privileges, so they're siding with them. I mean, it's just out of control.
Yeah, Augustine, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, well, regarding the article, thank you, Camila, for bringing that up. So I'm Spanish. I'm from Spain. I live in the UK, but I'm from Spain. And regarding this, the question of Christopher Columbus, I think it's a very interesting fact with the topic that we're talking about, knowledge, what is false knowledge, what is true knowledge. It's an interesting question whether we should tear down Christopher Columbus statues, because yes, we could think about he enslaved people that are now the population of the United States, obviously, but he died believing it was India rather than a new continent. He died believing he was getting another way through India, and he believed he arrived to India and never to a new continent. So was he enslaving people from the US when he actually denominated that people from another geographical part of the world? So that is a question, right? A question about who are you, who is actually the victim of your slavery in that consent? It's just a question that rises me. Please,
You didn't come anywhere near the United States, and the people you tried to enslave were the Native Americans that you found there. And it was only later on when the problem was that Europeans brought diseases to America, and large numbers of them died. So they were running out of people to work plantations, etc. So they thought, where can we get people from? I know there's already a slave trade going on in Africa. We'll just get people from there. So it's kind of a long thread that links Columbus to black slavery. You know, it's
right.
a bit hard to just say it's Columbus's fault. You know, if Columbus hadn't done it, someone else would have come along a year later and done the same.
Yeah, Frank.
Columbus never intended to get involved in the slave trade. Columbus was sent out in order to find the route to India. That was the whole idea. It was like all the other sailors which went out. They were absolutely interested in navigation. That was their thing, and opening up the world, getting through to the Pacific Ocean and finding a new route instead of going around Africa, the Cape of Good Hope. And therefore, it's irrelevant, the idea of connecting him to the slave trade. He wasn't connected to slavery, as you said. He didn't even step on the shores of America. And therefore, it's another typical mistake of this sort of vandalism which goes on where people do not have, we're talking about knowledge, truth, where people do not have the right knowledge. Here, you know, it's what Trump would say is fake news. In other words, they took. What I want to also say is that I've seen on television what goes on in America. It seems to be a sort of mob rule that the violence which goes on in knocking down these statues are connected to a certain extent with the plundering of shops in the cities. And so one form of violence, they're against the violence of the racism and what happened in the southern states in America. But on the other hand, we've got another form of mob rule which is going crazy, knocking down statues and plundering shops. And so we've got violence leading to violence, which in other words, it's a situation out of control. And it's the whole idea of applying today's values to ancient statues is, in my opinion, just an excuse in order to let out exasperation and to let out the frustration of the oppressed people, or if they are oppressed, the black minority, I don't know.
Go on.
So back to my point, which was that if you want to preserve the knowledge and get rid of the emotion, then take the statue away and just preserve the knowledge in some other form. Or as some are saying now, put the statue in a museum where it generates less emotion. If you separate these two things out, these two facets of where you invite people to bring into presence emotion and information, emotion and knowledge, then that's your social problem. That's the problem you create. You know, strange thing. I'm not particularly religious, but there are great things sometimes that spring out, and you know the Islamic sort of forbidding of graven images, not just Islamic, but you can't help but sense that that's why there is why that is downplayed, is that it's a bar to knowledge. It invites the emotion and takes away, and doesn't actually preserve very much in the form of knowledge.
Yes, well,
statues. Sorry, who's talking? But statues have always been a problem. Right in the Bible, Abraham, he broke the graven images. I mean, that was the symbol, and he smashed them. Whereas Christianity has images and statues that are important, and Orthodox Christianity has the actual icons themselves are holy. So things that you see and things that are up there are important. They do mean something. Once you start knocking things down, how far are you going to go? And if you put them in museums, that means you have to put everything in museums. You have to knock them. You have to knock everything down, because where do you stop? Where you say that one can stay in the street, that one's not bad. He wasn't a bad bloke. He was only 10% bad. We'll leave him up. But for people who say that 10% affects them terribly, that 10% is the important part.
Well, if you want the emotion that goes with it, then that's fine. But be aware of it. Don't be surprised if statues get defaced and shops nearby get wrecked.
Isn't it also something about the statues not illustrating enough of the history?
Yeah, I would agree.
There needs to be added. You know, these statues exclude certain significant history by what's absent. So I'm not taking a position to knock them down or leave them up or put them in a museum. But what's happening now is something's being expressed in a way that there isn't a narrative for it. You know, these statues exclude certain history. And I think that's the anger.
I don't think you include very much either.
Yeah,
I mean, I don't, you know, there's something about this symbolism that doesn't capture everything that went on in a fair way.
I used to live in Warrington, where there was a statue of Cromwell in a significant position. It's hard to miss. Now, we might think of Cromwell in a certain way, but an Irishman who sees that statue, he sees an absolute monster, a man who murdered thousands of his fellow citizens. So it is very hard to. But it would be better if you could put a plaque which explains, you know, I don't know who would write it. It would be a difficult job, but to try and get a balanced view of somebody.
But how on a plaque do you explain Cromwell?
Yes.
What I'm saying is it's not a good vehicle of knowledge. It is more a vehicle of emotion.
Hang on. Frank.
Cromwell executed the king. That's the most important thing.
Yeah.
And it's not just in Ireland. I mean, that was the reason why Cromwell took over the government, because he believed in a republic and not in the monarchy, and he executed Charles I, and so there's a lot to it apart from that. But on the other hand, you have monuments which are not really factually historic, such as Boadicea, which is the myth of Boadicea, who fought the Romans. We're not actually sure to what extent that was true and not true. And we have lots of Greek gods, right? So also statues, and even the Greek gods have offended people. Like, for instance, I've seen the god of Nicaea victory with her head cut off because it offended the Mamluks of Egypt. And even the popes didn't like the artistic statues of Michelangelo and other Renaissance sculptors, because they showed the genitals of the famous people, such as and for instance, even the artistic statues offend people. Take the famous statue of Michelangelo, David, right? Now, David was an icon of the Old Testament and of all our literature and the Western civilization. But on the other hand, what did David do? David killed a rival in order to marry his wife. He killed Uriah in order to marry Bathsheba. And therefore, he is a murderer. But that was pushed aside. And King David is known for all his conquests and for the fact that he was a great king, apart from that. So in other words, there's nothing really that you can find that doesn't have sort of a blemish to it. And I'm sure that every statue that goes up has a blemish. Take, for example, in Rome, in the Campo del Fiore, you have there a statue of Bruno, who was burnt at the stake, right, in 1600. Now, who put that statue up? It was the Freemasons who put that statue up. And the Pope and the Catholics hate the Freemasons. And they tried to pull the statue down. And therefore, even that statue of the poor guy, Bruno, who was burnt at the stake, even he had he had enemies. And so you can take anyone. Take example, the statues of Martin Luther. There are hundreds of statues of Martin Luther all over Europe. Do you know that Martin Luther was a great man? He brought in Protestantism. He really managed to break up Christianity into two different folds. But on the other hand, he slaughtered hundreds of thousands of pheasants. And that, of course, is also put sort of shoved under the carpet. And so on you can go and just pick these people one by one, and you'll find every single one of them has a blemish. So in other words, how do you really evaluate a historic statue? The only way to evaluate it is to say it's a representation of a certain culture in a certain time.
Maybe we could have two statues of each person, both next to each other. One the nice guy, the other one the absolute bastard.
Not bad.
But the statue also preserves something, doesn't it? It preserves and reflects something in current time. which some people may not agree with.
If we want to look at all the nice people who've got statues or books or music, we can look at Shakespeare and all his blemishes. We can look at Dickens, who was opposed to black suffrage. We can look at Jane Austen, that we all love, colonialism and slavery. We can look at Thomas Carlyle, Nietzsche, Wagner, who was an outright Nazi, whose music represented the worst of his possible philosophy, that beautiful music. We can look at Heidegger, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century, who was a Nazi, an outright Nazi, and never ever abrogated his position as a Nazi till the day he died. A great philosopher, a great philosopher. There's poor Churchill. The police have got to guard the statue of Churchill, who rescued, without him, the people who are doing that most probably wouldn't be alive, or at least would be speaking German. There was Karl Marx, that all these lefties are so keen, who was against the Bedouin, who wrote against the Bedouin, the Jews, the Chinese, Islam, and pre-capitalist societies in Africa. That was Karl Marx, the ones that everybody says is a really great bloke. There was Gandhi, who his well-documented contempt towards black Africans. There was unfortunately Martin Luther King, advice to homosexuals that they should seek psychiatric help. I mean, the list is endless. And as somebody here said, there's nobody without blemish. Where do you start? Well, we know where you start, but where do you stop? And maybe they should all go into museums. Maybe there should be nothing in the streets at all. Maybe we shouldn't read their books. But that's what's actually happening now. There are books that they're not allowed to read. There's all sorts of strange stuff going on. Yeah, all this is part of knowledge. It depends what we do with our knowledge. It depends how much we know and what we know and why we know it. So I don't know. Look, it's possible that in 100 years they're going to put down statues of people who once ate animals, actually killed animals to eat them. Imagine. And they're going to knock all these statues down. That bloke was a great bloke, but he ate animals, and everybody who ate animals, we're going to get rid of the statues. That's possible, isn't it? In 100 years, 150 years, why not? We can see it happening, but at the moment, eating animals, for most of us, for me, for example, is fine. It's okay, but that's because of the culture. But soon it might not be okay at all. So where does it all end? But the point is of what we were doing here is why are we questioning all this? I think that the reason is that if we question things, then we are free. We're at least free to question. It's when we stop questioning, then we cease being free. We're under people who know. We have to be aware of the people who know, and leaders know. They know, and we must be careful because we must also know. That was the point of this whole thing, I think. Anybody else?
I found when I get into political debates that there are people who don't really want to debate. They just want to call you names, and this happens whether they're right wing or left wing. They just sort of put you in a box and say, well, you're bad because you believe these things. Even if you're only putting them forward as a discussion point, you're not even allowed to do that. It's very intolerant.
Yes.
One question regarding the idea of maybe the solution is get all the statues and put them in a museum, and then you think about the place where the statue is and the value of the place, right? Like the point is basically maybe one statue in Bristol maybe can be everywhere, but maybe it's putting a place for a reason. So also whether that reason is good or bad, that get also lost. just for displacing the statue into just a museum. So that's another key issue on this topic, the idea of also the place of the statue has value. Whether it is good value or bad value, that's something to discuss, but the place has value. Someone important in my hometown died recently, an important politician, and one key debate was basically thinking about where to put his statue, because he was the mayor of the town, and hence we were thinking about putting near the council place, but then he was in a square hanging around usually. Other people like me thought maybe that would be the place. So also the place has value.
Frank?
I would keep away from museums. It's a very delicate subject, because the moment you go into museums, you've got a problem with all the bits of statues which have been robbed from the old societies of Greece and Turkey and the Middle East and everyone. And everybody today is fighting to get their statues and lumps of metal and lumps of bronze and lumps of granite back to their homelands. And therefore, the whole problem of museums is another kettle of fish entirely. You know what I mean? But the idea of putting them somewhere else is very good. Some countries, like in Czechoslovakia and in Budapest, they have taken a whole area within the city and put all the old models of Lenin and the old people inside this area, and you can go there, and that gives you another view of negative statues. You can look at the statues of people who are supposed to have done negative things, bad things, and you can say, well, they didn't succeed. You can look at the statues, say, of General Lee in southern state of America, and you can say, well, General Lee didn't manage to segregate the Confederate States from the American Union. General Lee didn't manage to continue with slavery. He didn't succeed. So in other words, you can also look at a statue in a different way, in a different manner, and you can still keep the statue. I want to come on to another way. If you finish knocking down all the statues, is that the end of the problem? It's not the end of the problem. You look at street signs. Have you looked at street signs? Many, many cities in the world, and in my country, in Israel, all the street signs are of famous people, right? And of course, some people like those people and some people don't like those people. So once again, you come to the same conflict of what people should be up on street signs and what people should be down on street signs. And so there's no end to this conflict of historic symbols. The problem is how to interpret the past, how to adjust yourself to different values of an old age, of an age gone by, and to accept things for the way they were, and to adjust yourself to their mentality. That's the way of looking at it historically. Otherwise, you're not looking at it historically. You're looking at it in a sort of contemporary manner of values today, which is a different way of looking at things.
Ron, would you be kind enough to just go back to the point you made where you said leaders know? I didn't kind of grasp what the key point was. Sorry to digress to go back to that, but I couldn't. I kind of thought.
You're asking me to remember. You're asking me to remember things, right?
Well, you said something about the leaders know.
No. The point is that knowledge is double-edged, right?
Yep.
So when you got leaders who know, and I put that in inverted commas, you got to be very, very careful, because leaders always know better, and that is a huge problem, because we know leaders who do not know better at all. But when a leader says, I know, and even worse, when he says, I know the truth, that is a very, very dangerous sign, because the truth is very dangerous. Somebody who says he knows the truth means that somebody who does not know the truth is basically in trouble, because the truth is very, very powerful. The truth in which those of you who've listened to me know that does not exist as far as I'm concerned. Absolute truth is nonsense. It cannot exist.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
but a leader will say he knows the truth, and you'll see the most powerful leaders all through history knew the truth, and those who did not know the truth were simply killed, because the truth is the truth that the leader knows. So we've got to be careful with knowledge, and we've got to make sure that we also have the knowledge that we have, whether it's right or wrong, whatever that means, right or wrong, whatever that means, it doesn't matter. As long as
and the correlation then with the statues.
The statues are a huge problem, because everybody knows about them, but everybody knows something different about them. And you will never agree. Anybody who wants to put a plaque up would have to have a plaque 10 times as large as the statue, because you can never put everything down that's part of what this person was. This person was a person who done things, and he might have done some terrible things, but he might have also done some wonderful things, and whoever looks at that statue will see it in complete different ways, and it's a huge problem. It's to do with knowledge, and knowledge moves. Knowledge is not static, and we all see it in different ways. Keith,
I agree.
I'm pleased to hear that.
The problem with the statues is what Frank was saying. They take on a life of their own, and they start to become, in people's minds, like a real person, as if they're actually alive, as if they're more than just the stones. Frank was saying people come in and chip bits off the statue and take it home and say and treasure it. Well, they're just lumps of stone, and I think the meaning of them does become exaggerated in people's minds, and this is where people start getting emotional about them and starting to tear them down. Maybe the solution would be what we were talking about, Neil, on Thursday, whenever it was. Maybe just get rid of the whole lot and just rely on, rather than having statues which only represent one view, rely on literature, on books about the people, on documentaries about the people. There's loads and loads of information about all these people, which give you both sides of the story. So I think the statues are probably too biased.
Or five sides of the story.
And maybe, their time is over. And also Frank was saying that you have roads named after people, and where does it end? Well, maybe it ends there. We get rid of it. You make things neutral so that people are okay with it. Why create problems? You got change the names of the roads and turn them into something that everybody will think is nice. The name of a tree or something.
Everybody will argue about everything.
I think then, if we can get rid of all these biased icons that are littering the public right of way, maybe that's the solution. Just get rid of them, and then we can rely on doing our own research and finding out about these people, and then we can form our own opinions, and we can do it that way. We'd have nothing to actually go out and destroy. So that's what I was going to say.
I think Keith is trying to say that we can remove conflict from the human condition, and I'm afraid, Keith, that's impossible. There'll always be conflict. Whatever you take away, there'll be something else.
Yeah. I think he's saying concentrate on the knowledge and not the emotion.
Yes, that's right. I'm saying take away these things which are causing people to actually go out and destroy and probably have fights at the same time, and maybe destroy the local, because you said they also damage the local shops as well if there's a statue needed. Let's get rid of those things. Now, that's not getting rid of human conflict. The conflict is still there, and as I said, there's plenty of things people can do without having to beat up statues, and they can go away and they can talk about it. They can have discussions like we're having, and they can read about it, they can learn about it, and they can debate about it, and they can do it that way. They don't have to have some lump of stone to go out and smash up, or a road sign to tear off. We get rid of those things, then people can start being a bit more sensible, a bit more mature, and do it in a more reasonable way.
I think in the United States, it was a perfect storm between the George Floyd murder and with the COVID-19, because all the states had different ideas about it. So most of us were, staying at home. And I think, the heat started, the warm weather, and people were starting to come out, and then he got murdered, and it just, but in Boston, I mean, I was watching the news and I couldn't believe the police did nothing. They torched, they burned a police vehicle. They pulled the policeman out before a policeman pulled the other one out. I mean, they probably would have gotten burned to death. They looted stores, and I'm watching on TV live, and the police weren't even around. They're afraid. And that's what's happening in this country. That's why they're going the opposite way, opposite direction, and they're just kowtowing to the blacks now, which I don't think is appropriate. I mean, they deserve some recognition and, but reparations, no, I don't, my family's not responsible for their slavery. I'm certainly not responsible. I don't know. I don't know where it's going to stop ever.
Is it not dying down though? Is it not? Is there no sign of it fading away, people losing interest and going on to something else? That's what will happen. Is there no sign of that yet?
Well, there's also the unemployment. They shut down this country, so the unemployment is worse than the Depression. So especially blacks, I mean, they probably weren't employed in the first place. And
well, that's due to COVID though, isn't it?
Right, because of COVID-19.
Yeah, not because of George Floyd.
So with unemployment, they're out in the street, they're just hanging around, and I don't know. It's hard to comprehend the whole situation because it's all different all over the country.
Keith, I don't know how anything can be neutral.
Well, I'm just talking about stuff outside in the public spaces.
Okay.
Things are normally neutral. I mean, everything in where I am in Formby, I can't think of anything that's nothing neutral.
Somebody will find something.
We don't have any political figure, we don't have any statues or names named after people who are likely to be controversial. I can't think of anything that could be biased or contentious in any way. So that, if we can do it, everybody else can do it.
Yeah. So Keith, an iconoclast, which leads me to there was a iconoclasm controversy in the Byzantine Empire, where basically the church leaders thought people are starting to worship these statues and icons. We'd better get rid of them all. I think I had the right idea. So.
What do you think, Camille? Do you think that's a good idea? Get rid of the statues?
Well, we're talking about religious statues, all
of them, the whole
iconoclasm and stuff.
The whole lot.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a great appreciator. I write articles on art. I mean, I love museums. The Boston Museum has a beautiful painting of George Washington crossing the Delaware. I mean, I hope they're not going to start taking these things down because, like I say, it's public art. It's for everyone. If you don't like it, then don't look at it. I don't have to appreciate everything either.
But a lot of people don't see it that way. They don't take that measured, reasoned view, do they? A lot of people say we don't like it, we're pulling it down. So that's what's causing them.
They don't have a right to.
Not everybody is a rational person.
There was an incident in Britain about 1913 where there was a suffragette who was protesting for votes for women. She went into an art gallery, I can't remember which one, and it had the Rokeby Venus in it by Velasquez, I think it was, and she slashed at it with a knife. And it wasn't like she disapproved of the painting; it was just a protest. So there's that element as well. There's the protest element, that you're protesting in a way that destroys things rather than attacks people. So there's that element as well.
She probably wouldn't attack any person, would she?
There is also the element of doing something illegal as a protest against the way a system is, and the idea that if protests become legal, it can lose their meaning. So that's another thing that can happen. For example, when you try to destroy a piece of art, that it will be something illegal, but that is the issue why the act becomes relevant. But still, it's problematic as well.
Yes, it makes a more powerful impression, doesn't it? If you do something illegal, then it's more likely to get publicised. Whereas if you do something that's perfectly legal, then nobody will notice.
Yeah. Then what kind of protest is that?
Keith, if everybody could sit together the way we are, then everything would be settled, if that would be at all possible. Unfortunately, it isn't. And the way we sit together and discuss things, I think, is wonderful so far. And but you're right that people should be able to sit together and should be able to discuss things, and not tear each other to pieces or knock down things. Let's talk. And you're right, this would be the best, but people don't. We've all been in groups that have been horrible. I've been in places where I've said the wrong word literally, and I didn't mean anything, and everybody leapt on me. I mean, I didn't even understand what I said. What he said that was wrong? And this happens all the time.
Yeah.
So
well, I think
what we've got here is, I think, pretty good. So far, we haven't killed each other or even got anywhere near it. But I think that's good. I think we should continue. I wish we could get more people. I wish we could have more groups like that. Your group is most probably also like that, which is, yeah.
Yes, we're always very polite, aren't we? I got into an internet discussion about J.K. Rowling, and I said, there might be something to what she says. And I had about 30 or 40 people piling on top of me as if I was, you transphobic so-and-so. I said, well, I was only raising a discussion point. I'm not saying
What's this? Sorry, Neil, what did you say?
On an internet discussion group I was in.
And you said what?
I said it might be worth looking at what J.K. Rowling has actually said, and is there any merit to it? But I might as well have said I'm Hitler. It would be the same thing.
Far too reasonable thing to say that. I don't know. You're being too sensible now. This is
exactly.
How dare you?
I think we're cut off from reality. That's my opinion. Because if you look at the people who are rioting or plundering, these are people who are in a very bad situation. I think Camille will agree with that. Most of them are unemployed. Most of them are in a very bad state, and they've got a reason to be frustrated. I'm not saying they're doing the right thing by plundering shops and they're going crazy, but nevertheless, they're in a different situation. They're not in a situation where they can sit back and have a rational discussion. There are people who are oppressed, who are frustrated, who are out of work, who are suffering, who want to make a living, who want to live decently. So you can't, it's like looking at the third world to a certain extent. You can't expect everybody to be in a situation where you can sit back and relax and have a nice discussion.
That's true.
That's true. Yeah.
One of the well, possibly the most interesting argument that's being put forward over here is, and relates to our discussion, is the main thing that seems to be coming over, which I wasn't aware of until recently, is a big claim, or perhaps the main claim, is that they are not understood. They are not heard and understood. It's that we just don't have the perspective that they have because we don't have the experiences that they have in ordinary life and how they understand life impacts for them. Well, and that seems to be their main frustration, is we just don't see it, however hard we try.
Well, somebody told me that they had a black friend. Now, these were two people. They're both well off. One's white, one's black. They both have a Mercedes or, some expensive car. The white guy has only been stopped by the police about once in 3 years. The black guy gets stopped about once a month by the police. Now, that sounds like it's just a trivial thing, but if it kept on happening to you every month, you'd start to think, that this is just not right.
Yeah, well, I used to do criminal law, and I used to listen to the stories that that black people used to tell me, and it is one of, if you are in my position, you would understand why I do what I do. I mean, that's not the argument they put, but that is what their essence was, if you like. And these are quite very rational people. They weren't stupid people or anything like that. But even I struggle to understand, I say even I, but I don't understand, and I cannot understand other people's perspectives. I can only understand people who are like me.
Yeah.
And that brings us back to knowledge. What knowledge do we have?
Exactly. So I think that if anybody got anything else to say it now, forever hold your whatever. And it was, yes.
I just want to say one last thing. I like the idea that was put here before that Keith, you actually said about that actually regarding the theme of statues when they are teared down. That adds some more value, some more history to the statue, because the statue was put at one time and was put in value, whether it was good or bad, but then it was teared down at some point. And we're talking about that as the present, but the next year we will reflect upon what statues this movement tear down and what statues didn't. So actually, the statues that disappear are part of history, a part of a little piece of history.
Yeah, the fact that there's a hole there now, isn't the fact that there's now an empty space represents the absence of that statue. Yeah.
I read an article. It was actually a joke about the statue in Bristol that apparently when it was teared down and thrown to the river, someone changed the location in Google Maps and put the location of this statue is now in the river. It's now there. And I was thinking, well, probably, thinking about maybe the pole empty and the statue was there, but now it's in the river. And that is part of history, the history of a movement. And then we can reflect about it. And yes, so I like the idea. Basically, that's the last thing I wanted to say.
And you Keith, you mentioned that people look at these statues and these represents something. When I saw on TV what people did to Colston statue was incredible, because they treated it like it was a human being. They stamped on it. They were wild. This was metal, but they wanted to tear it to pieces. I found this so primitive and so wild. This is a piece of metal. They were stamping on it and throwing in the river, and all they wanted to was to kill this person. I've found that horrific. So it's more than a statue. It's something.
Well, every 5th of November, we burn an effigy of a Catholic. So.
Yep, true. Yeah. Absolutely correct. So thank you everybody for coming. It was great seeing you all, and those I saw many times, great to see you. And to those new ones who came, wonderful to see you too. And I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. All the best to you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thanks. Bye.
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 Bye.